Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Boy, oh boy, we are back and excited to have our professional of the year joining us, Grand Venerable, here live today to talk more about art maker concepts and, of course, all that he can provide and all he has to offer. I got to meet with him last week to get to know him on a one-on-one basis, and he is pretty impressive, very smart, and he's here as a consul, lecturer, publisher, author, and so much more. So first and foremost, Grant, welcome back to the show. Let's just get a little quick overview for those that may have missed, your shows in the past and don't know much about you yet before we dive into things.
Well, I'm in a very interesting loop here. This is a new life. If people can adjust their vision as to what a new life would look like, that's where I am. I'm between two portals, or I was between two portals. One was my birth on the planet Earth in the center of Los Angeles, very close to the University of Southern California, USC campus, which is a lovely neighborhood of middle-class people. Many were professors at USC, and that's where I got my instructions for proceeding from there. That I was conscious probably from about, I can't judge, maybe I was 6 months old, maybe even less than that. And it's the earliest memory image I have that I yet retain. And the image was, I was awakening from a nap. And I know that I was outside. I was in what they call a baby buggy, I guess an ambulator that mothers could push their babies around the neighborhood and around the block. But I was in my grandmother's backyard because that's where my parents lived when they were first married. So they lived there 6 years. And I have this experience of looking through the gauze curtains that were over the top of this buggy. And I looked up and saw what I later learned was a guava tree. The guava fruit, probably native to Mexico, is one of the most delicious fruits I've ever eaten. It goes in a class of fruits along with white meat nectarines, peaches, and other things of that sort. Well, my eyes were opening and I was looking out at the sky through this gauze curtain and saw the tree. And that was it. That was the end of my dream image. Well, I must have been with several thousand other infants in that big city at that time. But LA was more of one great big town. It was a city made up of an assortment of small villages and towns. And each town, each village had its own identity. People knew each other in that town. They were what I would call communities. Communities, in fact, are coming back into fashion. Now, I don't know why I'm saying that, except I have a feeling just from watching some of the news feeds that things were not picking up on the evening news. We are getting things on the news feeds. We're getting information just by walking around and being with the neighborhoods that we're in. I'm in one of the most fascinating neighborhoods in the United States right now. I'm only 100 and maybe 80 miles from where I was born, but I'm due east of Los Angeles and the USC campus. I'm up in the desert mountains. There's a lot of mountains in the eastern part of Southern California. Southern Cal is probably the most populous region of the United States. It has more people than Texas and New York.
Yeah.
about maybe 18 to 20 million people live in Southern California,
Okay.
from the Mexican border around San Diego
Ugh.
as far north as San Luis Obispo.
Mm-hmm.
And people come out here and they love to travel on Highway 1, Highway 101. Back to the story. Um,
It's okay.
I,
We always digress. It's fine. This is great conversation.
yes, yes, it's going to get at the nugget of something. I went to elementary school in that neighborhood. It was called Vermont Avenue Elementary School, one of the oldest schools in that city. It
Yeah.
had one of the finest faculty of teachers. All the faculty were women teachers, except for one or two men on the faculty,
Mm-hmm.
which was quite a statement on the social environment in the United States. My family was quite an item in that neighborhood. It's what people used to call an interracial, intercultural, interethnic neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
interreligious, people from all sorts of backgrounds of a relatively middle to upper middle class lifestyle. And you could recognize that just from walking to school. Well, actually, I think my mother would trail me, or my sister and brother would, just to make sure we were crossing the streets properly. But coming home, we walked home with classmates from our classes, from various persuasions and backgrounds, and that was an enriched part of our growing up experience.
Mm-hmm.
All these children loved each other. They loved hanging out with each other, and there was a great Asian population in that neighborhood, composed of kids whose parents had just really come from Japan. There were Koreans, there were Chinese, there were also Spanish-speaking people. All these kids just loved to commingle with each other. They enjoyed each other so much. Uh, there were people from different religious faiths. There were Jewish people. There were African American people. There were Mormon youngsters. Everybody was there. Now, in other neighborhoods of Los Angeles, it wasn't quite that
Mm-hmm.
commingled, but that became a deep basis of our adult beings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I stand today, in that we are in a community, a human community, and what we have identified as races are not races. They're just people that commingle together. And yes, we have names we give to different heritages,
Mm-hmm.
but bottom line message, and those of us who've reached more senior years still carry within us the memory, which is one of the most important attribute of a human being. Memory, because it
Mm-hmm.
connects into the mythology of life. Okay, I threw out another word.
Yes.
Mythology.
Mythology.
I
Yes.
don't mean Greek mythology as such. I don't mean
Mm-hmm.
Apollo on his chariot with the sun on the chariot flying across the sky from
Yeah.
sunrise to sundown. I mean the special field of study in philosophy that really studies the
Yeah.
image of memory. So it's not really about explaining scientific phenomena in mythology.
Yeah.
It's about the process of finding meaning of our lives. What is our purpose? What
Mm-hmm.
is the meaning
Yeah.
of living? What's that about? That was a big topic at a religious a community I was at yesterday. Was, okay, why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that got everyone off on many directions. Well, the religious direction that our young leader wanted us to take was to get more at the meat of the the Christianity, the Judaism that was involved. And there I was. I was doing the same thing I did as a kid. I was the guy that always brought in a different attitude or point of view. And I said something about my purpose. This is something that came out in my career as a professor at San Francisco State University. I had changed from being a chemistry professor in the 1970s at this magnificent Cal Poly State University, just 12 miles from the beach. Anywhere you go, to the west, 12 miles to the south, 12
You're
miles.
Making me jealous.
I was there 6 years. I had many experiences. I felt I'm not advancing as quickly as I wanted to. I even had tenure. I think people are hearing more of that word these days. What is tenure?
Yeah.
It basically means lifetime employment. If you don't do anything wrong, you're going to have lifetime employment.
Yep.
And if you do it right and you understand knowledge, you do research that teaches more about knowledge of human existence. That's the keys to getting tenure. But tenure is also to protect professors who have different ideas that might be so different that it upsets some people who have different belief systems. So we have all these beliefs swimming around in this great ocean of meaning, and everybody's drawing different meanings from what is the life process about. Well, my meaning was to be able to do as I envisioned people did in the 1800s, early 1900s. The ideal kind of colleges were small colleges like Amherst for men, like Smith College for women, and there were green lawns outside. Professors would take their classes outdoors and talk about the great ideas embodied in the great books, in the great poetry, the great literature, the great scientific writings, and they would talk. Education revolved around talking. It did not revolve around how to get a job. Now, it came along later that people thought, after World War II, there were 2 or 3 million GIs coming back who hadn't been stateside for 2 or 3 years. What were they going to do? They didn't have up-to-date knowledge. They hadn't been to college. And that's when Congress people got the idea of starting a GI Bill. Now that gets to the answer. The big raging debate today is you have to go to a college that gets you ready for a job within preferably 6 months after you graduate. And if you don't get a job, then we have to investigate the college to see, well, what is it doing? It's taking your money, but it's not getting you ready for a job. But gosh darn, people in Emily Dickinson's day went to college to develop their minds. Because with a developed mind, they could handle anything, whether it was a job. There are Silicon Valley companies today who would rather hire a poet or a philosopher or an artist than someone trained in computer science. Why? Because once they're hired at the company, they give them on-the-job training. Now, that gets at the nub that shows some of the flaws in the arguments out there. So the GI Bill was a bill to pay grants to these returning GIs. So while they were away, it was the female adults of the society that were operating industry. My stepmom worked at Lockheed Aircraft in some very technical positions, which they taught her how to do those positions. And there were just legions and legions of women in the Southern California aircraft industry and the early space industry and all the other technical industries that were doing that. But when the guys came home,
Yeah.
the women were sent home to do their traditional careers of taking care of the young ones and to take care of the household. So it launched a lot of
Of course.
attitudinal changes in the
Yeah.
1950s. We had, my favorite program was Ozzie and Harriet in the 1950s. Wherever I was, I would make sure to be home by 7 o'clock to see Ozzie and Harriet. And there were other
Mm-hmm.
great shows. But then came the 60s,
Yep.
that remarkable era. And the 60s really led to a collage of debates about now what is proper on how can society
Mm-hmm.
help human beings be developed to take better care of the society that we want to be a community where people are in constant positive interaction with one another. Somewhere in there, language shifted. Labels came about. Labels can be great if you're talking about labeling the groceries that you have to buy.
Yeah.
But we started to label human beings big
Yeah, we
time
did. Absolutely.
too. And did you have a relationship with labels, Jill,
Yes.
that were memorable?
Of course. I'm a labeler. I do label everything. I have two little kids, so I used to label their clothes, their lunch boxes, and now I label things around the house. Sorry.
That labeling, there's the positive charge on labeling,
But
and then
then
there's the
the
other charge
OCD of
on
it.
labeling
Yeah.
to classify people to be able to get a quick take on, oh, they're that, or
I know.
they're
I
that.
know. That's what I meant. Labels as in I know. Oh, you're an attorney. Oh,
That's
you're a doctor. No, no. I don't label like that. No, no, no. Because but labels are important to many people, which I don't find mm, that
I'm a
attractive.
labeler in science,
There you go. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and my teaching was particularly valuable
Mm-hmm.
because of the quality of labels that I was able to introduce to my students in the chemistry classroom at Cal Poly.
Mm-hmm.
And I would introduce a chemical principle by
Wow.
introducing a poem by Emily Dickinson, uh, D.H. Lawrence, or Langston Hughes, and carrying them into the idea of chemistry that matched that label, the thing that the poem was addressing. There was there was another one that I liked too, Pocket Full of Seeds, that poem.
Yeah.
But the seeds I wanted the students to get were called atoms and molecules,
Mm-hmm.
which were the
Yeah.
seeds of creating matter, material substance,
Yeah.
developing new substances. So that's where I I morphed from strict labels to how can we use labels to develop our minds?
Yeah.
Now that I got through elementary to junior high school. Oh, uh, this idea called diversity,
Yeah.
which is so important because we would be so bored so quick if everything were the same. If the White House suddenly said, we will only eat bananas and oranges and apples in this society. So if the stores sell anything else, we will criminalize them.
Yeah.
And it morphed to people, labels for people. The diversity I experienced in the elementary teachers was in their particular heritages, namely in where their grandparents came from. And that was an early entree to understanding and absorbing what we mean by patriotism. Because these people, these teachers, educated,
Yeah.
bright people, women mostly, as I said, and many stood out for me. And one was my fourth grade teacher, who was the first child of 9 children in her family to
Wow.
be born in America in
Ah.
1885. All the other children were born in Norway,
Mm-hmm.
and the parents made a decision to immigrate to the United
Mm-hmm.
States, and they became what became this mass of people called immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Immigrants. And they added so much value to the culture.
Yeah.
This teacher gave us her immigrant pride of being in America, that she could throw her shoulders back and hold her head high of what her father told them in Minnesota in the Norwegian community.
Wow.
She said, now we're Americans. And
Mm.
that's what she picked up.
Yeah.
And that's what she conveyed to her young charges. Whenever we would get in a little snits out on the playground, she would remind us where she came from. And she'd tell us, that's who you are. You are Americans. That's the greatest label in the world that we have
Wow.
in this country. So that's where a lot started, with those teachers from various backgrounds and religions, and then to junior high school, which was a little intimidating for me because it went into, we had to change classrooms.
Yeah.
That was the tradition.
Yeah.
It was getting more toward getting you ready for college, where
Mm-hmm.
you changed classrooms, you changed buildings. And I didn't like that. I was a child conservative. I wanted things to stay as they were because
Yeah,
I
of
was used
course.
to them. But I got used to it. I mean, the teachers would stand outside their classroom doors and watch the children as we went from classroom to classroom.
Amazing.
But that's where we had to start getting attitudes ready for college.
No.
And namely, you're not going to be in the same classroom. And all these children, and some of them are constantly shouting in the hallways, but
Oh.
in that classroom, it was a quiet haven again, with a
Ah.
diversity of teachers who taught from their own passion, their own genius,
Yeah.
how to do the various subjects. My math teacher taught us how to extract square roots
Wow.
using what he called Google eggs. And I don't even remember what that indicated, but he told us how to extract and treat the numbers, so we ultimately got the square root of a number. By square root, of course, like,
Yeah.
what's the square root of 25? It's 5.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
the
got
square of
that.
5 gives you the square. And that was our entree to more advanced subjects like algebra and geometry. And that opened up in high school.
Yeah.
But I was getting aware of being called into science, not chemistry yet, but just generally science.
Yep.
And my father was a key player, whom you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier. And my
Aw.
father was a revered figure in the community who
Mm-hmm.
knew us at that school. Why was that? Because he was famous in that LA community
Yeah.
for having graduated from a school called Caltech. The full name is the California Institute of Technology,
Mm-hmm.
considered in Southern California as the greatest
Prestigious as
school.
ever. Yes, I know someone that's been there. Not me.
Right. Well, those kids were considered geniuses,
Mm-hmm.
but it was maybe the greatest school of science and engineering in California and in the United States, maybe, but it was a young school. It was only took off around 1920 when they hired a Nobel Prize winner to be their first modern day president, named Robert Millikan.
Mm-hmm.
And Millikan called great professors, mainly from the University of Chicago, but also MIT, Wisconsin, Berkeley, to set up Caltech. Well, how in the world did my father get to Caltech?
Mm-hmm.
That gets to the labels of the day
Yep.
and the sociology of the times. There were little curious customs in those days. Some states did not allow certain labels of people to go to their great universities because they were reserved for labeled people who were from the European backgrounds. And they had special names. And people were from other national backgrounds were not really expected to go to those great schools back east, in the Midwest, down south, and even some of the prairie and the western states. But California was open. It was like an open state for its citizens beginning around the 1900s. Well, here was Dad. He had been sent from Kansas City, Missouri by his mother and father because the doctor said he needed a drier climate. He looked like he was developing a tuberculosis spot on his lung. And so they sent him to do what? Stay with his father's brothers and sisters who had already lived in the San Bernardino area of Southern California. And he lived with them for a couple of years, went to San Bernardino High School. And it just so happens most of the kids at San Bernardino High School had ancestors who came from Europe, especially Northern Europe. So that was one group. There were 5 kids who had African American ancestors, including my dad. Well, wouldn't you know it, those kids seemed to get along quite well. And my dad went to the junior college in Santa Ana because his mother had moved to California by that time, and she got a job as a maid and a cook in one of the big ranches in Santa Ana. So Dad ran track and he studied engineering and science at Santa Ana Junior College and developed himself so he could transfer to USC, which he did in 1921-22. That's over 100 years ago. Amazing. So he developed himself further, and he started at UCLA, but it wasn't named UCLA then. UCLA had been a teacher training school starting in 1881. But by 1919, it became the second campus of the University of California. It was called UC Southern Branch. But it had some of the best professors in the state of California. And my father was a freshman there. He went to school with many fine youngsters from different backgrounds. There was a man, excuse me, there was a named Ralph Bunch who was at UCLA at the same time. Ralph Bunch went on to become one of the greatest people in the United States, in the government, in universities. And he was called on as, excuse me, as an advisor to people high up in the government. He also was at one time, many years, was the undersecretary of the United Nations. I think, that may be a building
Impressive.
in the picture behind you.
Oh my gosh.
Then Dad went on to a mathematics major. I think there were not more than 2 human beings west of the Mississippi River who were from his ancestral background who were majoring in mathematics. Long story short, he got kicked out of what became UCLA. I think the chair didn't quite like his presence in the math department. But that's neither here nor there right now. But Dad was so heartbroken that he decided he had to get it right. He had to really know where he was walking. And he said to himself, I'm going to apply to Caltech, but I'm not going to tell anyone because I don't want anyone to say You can't go there. That's
God
too
bless.
difficult for
Yep.
you. So he got in.
Ah,
And
amazing.
nobody knows how he got in, actually. But he really got in because
Uh-huh.
he slam dunked the mathematics entrance exam. He should
Awesome.
have. He'd already studied a few years of math.
Yeah.
But the admissions office at Caltech said, you are so good at math
Mm-hmm.
that you will learn physics, even if you didn't do well on the physics exam. There were no SATs in those days,
Yep.
but he mastered his way through Caltech. And his first jobs were on the desert. Talk about closing the loop. Here I am now on the high desert above Palm Springs in
Wow.
29 California, surrounded by these beautiful desert mountains
Ah,
next to Joshua Tree National Monument. There's no darker place in the United States than Joshua Tree. Now we'll say pause for
okay.
a little breather here. Um, Dad, Grant D. Venerable,
Mm-hmm.
that was his name. Interesting name. He had to satisfy 3 criteria that
Mm-hmm.
are not written down in the
Yeah.
admission requirements. Once you're in, you have to learn how to get along with your classmates.
Darn right.
If you don't, you may not understand all the material because the curriculum is so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
These students have to know how to get along and talk to one another to master the difficult mathematics and the science. Number
Mm-hmm.
2, you have to get along with your teachers, even if you think they don't like you, but you have to at least act like you like them. Number 3, you had to get along with the deans
Mm-hmm.
because the deans run the shop.
So true.
Well, he was a natural at that. He had this very warm and gentle personality.
Yeah.
So it really drew his classmates to him, and he befriended just about everyone on the campus. Now, Pasadena in those days was not Pasadena as it was today. And
Okay.
that takes us to some very serious eyeball to eyeball conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Pasadena had laws. No, people may not believe this, but they did not want people of African ancestry walking around their city.
Ah,
They didn't even want you to
horrible.
have
Horrible.
maids and butlers or chauffeurs African American
Disgusting.
background.
Mm-hmm.
So what did that do? It meant Beverly Hills became the wealthy area because the people could at least hire these minority people to take care of their households and cook for them. So that's where my father's mother worked, was in Beverly Hills.
Mm-hmm.
So hold on to that because that's an important side trip of America.
Mm-hmm.
The police of Pasadena got to know my father very well because he had to walk around at some point in that city. And when they would see him,
Oh,
they would they when they first met him, that's when they got to know him. And whenever they'd see him, they'd stop and they'd pick him up and take him home
mm-hmm.
so he wouldn't be walking the streets.
Oh,
But there was at least an amicable
mm-hmm.
relationship that
Yeah.
developed. And that
Yeah.
also helped him to get through. So that's an important part of my background as why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
And then why am I here morphs into, okay, how do you deal with why am I here? So when I got through high school, a place called Manual Arts High School, you'd think it was a vocational school. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't. But it
Yeah.
had 3 curricula and one was vocational. But the other 2 were fine arts and liberal arts, including science and mathematics.
Yeah.
So I went to UCLA from there. The stories about that are in my memoir. It's something you can only read about to believe it, because some were so incredible. Very few people actually write about their college classroom experiences. And I don't know why I did, except by the time I was retired, I felt I wanted to sit down and write a summation of my existence, starting with kindergarten, going through high school, and then the University of Chicago. Not that many youngsters in LA would go to graduate school east of the Mississippi, because California had developed this outstanding educational system under the organized name of the University of California. Today it has something like 11 campuses, but they're all top-rated campuses. They're all like little Caltechs, little Harvards, all in one state. So my professors talked me up to go to the University of Chicago. The story is written up in my memoir called Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown.
Beautiful.
That was a chaotic unknown for me in college.
Really?
Because the first year I felt kind of lost in this big university. And
who wouldn't be, right?
Swimming in calculus. I said, what is this? What is this about? It should have been a slam dunk.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, because the leap into college was so great that it was freaking me out a little bit. I studied philosophy. Even that freaked me out.
Murphy's Law, did that freak you out? I'm just trying to segue, but we're on a good jive here. But just letting you know, I remember we had some notes that I didn't know if were important to you to make sure we discuss.
Yes. Now let's pluck out one of the cherries in the notes.
Yes.
That seem right for the moment. We've done the college one, but there's the Murphy's Law one. And Murphy's Law has an upstairs and a downstairs to it. The downstairs is the law that says if something will go wrong on something, it will.
Yeah.
And it kind of came out of the realm of science and engineering as a pun, as a sense of humor when you run up against something difficult that you're studying. Well, Murphy's Law must be enacting right now. But Murphy's Law actually has a basis in 2 or 3 of the most important laws in the science world. And I think not even the scientists themselves understood their full importance.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we were specializing as a society. The further we got from after World War II, knowledge was labeled and put into little boxes. And so each of the fields just got more specialized. And Caltech meant to prevent that by not allowing all the departmentalization of knowledge that occurred everywhere else. So there were engineering majors had to study 4 what they call branches of engineering: mechanical, electrical, aeronautical, and civil. Of course, civil had to do with building bridges, building highways, building great structures like dams, canals. And that was my father's primary interest. But he had to learn aeronautical, and the first wind tunnels were just being developed at Caltech back in the 1920s under a gentleman who came from Europe. There's another immigrant, and he was the expert on that, Theodore von Karman. And then there were other things that, like the electrical engineering people, the mechanical engineering people, So he had to master all of those fields. One interesting sidelight is one of my father's professors of civil engineering, a man named Converse, was an expert on earthquake, building things, constructions that could withstand earthquakes. That really was starting in the 1920s, places like Caltech, Berkeley, Stanford, and especially those places. So this Converse was a consultant on, guess what? The construction of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Wow.
Across from San Francisco
Mm-hmm.
to Marin County in Northern California. That presented particular challenges because that bridge,
Could imagine.
it's
Yeah.
about a mile and a half
Mm-hmm.
across the Golden Gate. That's ocean. I mean,
Wow.
it may be a gate, but it's pure ocean. And
Absolutely.
ocean currents, ocean winds are always coming through that gate.
Beautiful.
That called for special genius to build that thing. So Converse was a
Absolutely.
consultant on the South Pier of the Golden Gate Bridge, that big
Wow.
tower that
Okay.
holds up the roadway that goes into San Francisco. And that tower is completely in ocean water.
Mm-hmm.
They had to build a coffer dam. They had to go down deep, 200 feet into
Amazing.
the ocean to build a dam so they could dig out a foundation for that South Tower, concrete foundation that they could lay steel girders on. The North Tower, it was built on land, so they didn't have to do that. But that's just an interesting little tale. So that 2 years ago, when Caltech named a residence hall after my father, Grant D. Venerable, the
Mm-hmm.
students of that hall heard that story, and they put a photograph, a painting photograph on the back of that T-shirt of the Golden Gate Bridge,
Yeah.
because they knew he had something to do with its
Mm-hmm.
construction. But now we have to loop back. We're getting down to the
Okay.
end of our journey here. There's two laws. One law really looks at chemistry, chemical reactions, chemical processes. The other law is the same kind of knowledge that has to do with atoms, molecules, nuclei, elementary particles, and all those things have energies associated with them. Two kinds of energy. One kind of energy for a chemical reaction has to do with the heat of formation of a molecule. When a molecule is formed, it releases beaucoup of thermal heat energy.
Mm-hmm.
The other kind of energy that's released in a reaction has to do with the way that molecule is distributed over physical geometric space.
Mm-hmm.
That means it depends upon the particles, how they're distributed throughout space.
Yeah.
Then the other kind of process in physics has to do with elementary particles. Einstein's theories, Maxwell's theories, had to do a lot with those ideas about two
Mm-hmm.
kinds of energies. Those energies go to the core of
Yep.
what a human being is, a mortal. And we have to go to mythology because there's four fields you really need to look at. One was, how do you bring the ideas of religion together, the ideas of mythology, meaning in human existence? Bring that together with psychology, the psychology of Freud and Carl Jung. How do you bring that together
Yeah.
with the ideas of religion? And then how do you bring all of it together with mathematics and science? That, my friends, is the core of my memoir, is how do you do that so that those things are not competing and fighting against each other.
Of
They're
course.
unifying life for all of us. to find what is the meaning in our lives.
Yeah.
And I started to do that.
Pretty deep.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
When I was in graduate school,
Yeah.
and my professor said, okay, Grant, don't go too over specialized. I mean, you got to be specialized with this dissertation. So that's where we want you to spend your time now. Once you graduate, then you can do all of the philosophy, religion, science, math together. Second, you can do it all you want. So I think that you may have a response to all that as we start to finish up here.
I mean, you are just someone who's so world renowned, so smart. To hear about your father, your upbringing, your mathematics background, your science background, you are just, this is impeccable. You know, I speak to a lot of people every day, and I'm sure you do over the course of your years as well. But it's always insightful to hear, other people's stories and journeys and what they've been through. And clearly, wow, all that you've accomplished. I mean, could I ask, what would you say is your most proudest achievement? Is it the memoir? Is it your family? Is it what
You
would it
know,
be?
I'd have to say that
Okay.
it is, because the family is such a paradox in itself that represents theories of science
Mm-hmm.
that you wouldn't have without families like
Yeah.
mine, where so many people from different heritages came together. They crossed paths, they commingled with each other. And so you had Confederate members of the family who owned other members of my family, who got together and created new members of the family,
Mm-hmm.
descendants of whom also now work at Caltech.
Oh my
So
goodness.
how do you deal with that? You have to deal with that with a diverse curriculum and a lot
Yeah.
of diversity, equity, and inclusion in society. And remembering this, that DEI, that famous word now, it's the Latin word for God.
Mm-hmm.
And those who have some appreciation of God will want some appreciation of that.
Yeah.
DEI. So there's photographs. I think that's scholarly people don't usually put photographs in their books. But you
Mm-hmm.
could look in my book, you could see what all my grandparents looked like, what many of their parents looked like, their grandparents looked like. And you'll say,
Yeah.
oh, that's why he looks the way he looks. And his brother and sister don't look like me all that much. They look like other ancestors, but we all celebrate and revolve around our parents' geniuses and
Mm-hmm.
creativities.
Wow. Well, pretty amazing here. We still got a few more minutes left. How did you want to leave off? My goodness.
I think I could leave off by saying there are not the artificial boundaries, number one, between people, even when they've been taught to imagine that they're there, that people are different.
Yeah.
They're more different within their own quote group than between groups.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is that our religious beliefs are not all that different. It all comes down to one deity or God or
Mm-hmm.
supreme spirit, whatever it is. And that brought me to yesterday I shared a verse from John 1:1.
Aw, go ahead.
In the beginning was the Word,
Yeah.
and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But I didn't figure that out until a year ago, what it
Mm-hmm.
really meant. Because word in Greek is represented by
Yeah.
logos. And logos really in the Greek mind and the African minds that taught the Greek minds, it's narrative. It's what we're doing right now. We're narrating human experience.
Yeah.
So God is really whatever is your narrative about God.
Yeah.
So it could go everything from atheism to evangelical Christianity. So that's my conclusion for today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Wow. Okay. Amazing conversation. Great show as always. Now, if anyone's out there that would like to contact you and, of course, pick up some of your work, how do we do so?
Email ventwo@aol.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Grant. Always a pleasure having you, putting a smile on my face and so many.
Be interviewed by you.
I don't get to do much. I get to absorb so much about you, learn about you, and everyone else does, and that's the most important thing. You are an incredible person, and I'm so glad that we're here and that you're sharing your story and journey with so many others. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you, Jill.
You have a
Thank you so much.
fantastic day, darling. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.